Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, and free waffles are yours to claim. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
This episode is brought to you by Fox One. Watch all 104 matches of the FIFA World Cup live in 4K for just $19.99 a month with 3 days free. Build your own multi-view, choose up to 3 streams, and follow player spotlights. Stay on top of every moment with live stats, highlights, and instant replays. The FIFA World Cup, streaming live on Fox One. Offers are subject to change. See fox.com for complete terms and conditions.
The Stone Zone on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome into the Stone Zone. The results of New York City's June 23rd Democrat primary election should serve as a wake-up call to every American who values free enterprise, private property, limited government, law and order, and the constitutional principles upon which our republic was founded. What happened in New York was not merely a local political story. It was a glimpse into a larger ideological battle that is unfolding across the United States. The old Democrat Party of John F. Kennedy and Harry Truman, the Democrat Party that believed in free enterprise, capitalism, a strong national defense, patriotism, that party no longer exists. The candidates who emerged victorious represented a movement that seeks to fundamentally transform the relationship between the citizen and the state, between private property and government power, and between individual liberty and collective control. The biggest story of the night, of course, was the stunning success of candidates backed by New York City's socialist mayor, Zohran Mamdani, and the Democrat Socialists of America. In New York's 13th congressional district, Daria Liza Avila Chevalier defeated 5-term Congresswoman Adriana S. Piat in what many observers described as the political upset of the evening. In New York's 7th congressional district, Democrat Socialist Claire Valdez captured the nomination for an open congressional seat. In New York's 10th congressional district, former New York City Comptroller Brad Lander, who had actually run for mayor against Mamdani and then sidled up to the socialists, aligning himself closely with them, actually defeated Dan Goldman. Dan Goldman, scion to the Levi Strauss fortune, one of the most liberal members of Congress. When Dan Goldman is in trouble from the left, well, Chuck Schumer should be shaking in his boots. Although Lander is not formally a member of the Democrat Socialists of America, all 3 of those candidates, embraced by the same political movement, campaigned as part of a coordinated effort to push New York's Democratic Party even further to the left. Victory celebrations reportedly featured chants of DSA, that's Democrat Socialists of America, as activists celebrated what they viewed as a major breakthrough for their movement. The most enjoyable part of the evening, of course, was when George Conway, formerly a member of the Conservative Federalist Society, then a full-blown never-Trumper, spent $6 million of his own money in the 12th Congressional District. That is the district of the retiring Jerry Nadler, probably the most liberal district in the United States, in order to come in 5th. He spent $6 million to get 6% of the vote and approximately 6,000 votes. That means that George Conway spent about $1 million per vote received. It was Conway, of course, who engineered the change in New York state law in which the statute of limitations for sexual assault was extended in order to frame Donald Trump. That was done by E. Jean Carroll. Little did Conway know that he would also catch former Mayor Eric Adams and former Governor Andrew Cuomo in similar lawsuits. This was a stunning rebuke for George Conway, kind of the highlight of the evening for me. These victories matter because they represent far more than routine Democrat primary contests. They signal the growing influence of an organized socialist movement that is rapidly consolidating power with one of America's largest cities and now seeks to export that influence, as we saw recently with the selection of a socialist mayor in Washington, D.C. What was once dismissed as a fringe ideology is increasingly becoming the dominant force within the Democrat Party in America's urban centers. Many Americans have comforted themselves with the belief that socialism could never actually gain meaningful traction in the United States. We were told that Americans were too independent, too entrepreneurial, too devoted to constitutional liberty, too smart to embrace an ideology that has repeatedly failed wherever it has been implemented. Yet the victories of these Democrat socialist-backed candidates demonstrate that socialism is no longer confined to college campuses, activist organizations, and academic departments. It is now finding its way into Congress itself. Unfortunately, younger Americans have been taught a version of history that bears very little resemblance to reality. They hear the word socialism and they imagine fairness, compassion, and economic justice. They rarely hear about the millions who suffered under socialist and communist regimes. They're taught about the promises, but not the consequences. They're encouraged to view free enterprise as exploitive, while being shielded from the historical record of economic collapse, political repression, censorship, human misery, and suffering that has accompanied activist experiments throughout the 20th century. The truth is that socialism and communism are not identical, but history demonstrates that socialism often serves as the gateway through which nations move towards greater concentrations of government power and ultimately Marxism. The central premise of socialism that government should exercise increasing control over economic life in order to produce desired social outcomes. Once government assumes that role, it inevitably seeks more authority, more regulation, more taxation, and more control of your everyday life. Individual liberty becomes subordinate to political objectives. The state grows while personal freedom contracts. Essentially, socialism is a one-way ticket to communism, and both are evil. Communism remains one of history's most thoroughly discredited political experiments. From Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union, to Mao's China, to Castro's Cuba, to Pol Pot's killing fields of Cambodia, communist systems produced poverty, shortages, repression, censorship, political imprisonment, and mass death. The promises were always the same, though: equality, fairness, justice. The outcomes were remarkably consistent: economic stagnation, bureaucratic control, corruption, and the concentration of power in the hands of a ruling elite. No place can we see this more evident than in Castro's Cuba today. Supporters of democratic socialism insist they're not communists. They only seek a more generous welfare state. Free this, free that, free health care, free education, free groceries, free everything. Yet history teaches that the danger lies not merely in intentions, but in incentives. Every expansion of government authority creates pressure for further expansion. Government programs become permanent. Bureaucracy become self-sustaining. Citizens become increasingly dependent upon political institutions for needs once met by families, churches, communities, charities, and private enterprise. That's why the current generation must understand that the Democrat Party of John F. Kennedy bears very little resemblance to the Democrat Party of today, which is increasingly influenced by these socialist activists. John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert Kennedy were fierce anti-communists. Jack Kennedy believed in American exceptionalism. He advocated tax cuts to stimulate economic growth. He projected strength abroad and understood the importance of national sovereignty. He called in his 1960 campaign for a big national defense build-up, claiming that America had a missile gap with the Russians. His famous call for Americans to ask not what they could do for themselves, but what they could do for their country, reflected a philosophy of responsibility and citizenship that stands in stark contrast to today's politics of grievance, dependency, and identity-based division. Now, many younger voters have never been taught this history. They're led to believe that modern progressive politics is simply the natural continuation of a great democratic tradition. but nothing could be further from the truth. The ideological distance between JFK and the Democratic Socialist America is enormous. Kennedy confronted communism. Today's socialist activists confront and actually frequently embrace communism. They do, however, attack capitalism while embracing many assumptions that the communist movements promoted throughout the 20th century. The developments in New York are particularly alarming because New York City has historically served as a political and cultural trendsetter for the nation. Ideas that begin in New York often migrate into universities, media institutions, entertainment, corporate boardrooms, and eventually federal policymaking. The city has increasingly become a laboratory for radical experiments in criminal justice, housing policy, immigration policy, and economic regulation. The congressional victories celebrated by socialist activists represent an effort to export those policies nationwide. Equally troubling is the broader political climate that has emerged in New York City. New York is home to the largest Jewish population outside of Israel, yet recent years have witnessed growing hostility towards Israel, increasing anti-Semitic incidents, and political rhetoric that would have been considered unacceptable just a few years ago. Many Jewish New Yorkers who once viewed the city as a refuge now express growing concern about the direction of its political culture and their safety in it. Supporters of the socialist movement argue that they are responding to legitimate concerns about housing costs, inflation, healthcare expenses, and economic inequality. Those concerns are real. Americans are struggling with affordability. Families are worried about their futures. Young people face challenges that deserve serious attention. The answer, however, is not to abandon the principles of free enterprise that made America and the United States the most prosperous and innovative nation in human history. American strength has always rested upon free enterprise, private property, entrepreneurship, constitutional government, and individual liberty. These principles created the largest and most prosperous middle class the world has ever known. They generated unprecedented innovation, economic mobility, and opportunity. The danger facing the nation is not that socialism will arrive overnight. The danger is that it advances gradually, wrapped in the language of compassion and fairness, while steadily increasing the power of government over every aspect of American life. Freedom is rarely lost in a single dramatic moment. More often it erodes incrementally as citizens become accustomed to surrendering responsibility and authority to political institutions. You're listening to the Stone Zone. I'm Roger Stone, sounding the clarion call, and we'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
Need a laptop that's built to perform and designed to last all day? Select Windows 11 PCs starting at $499.99 are now at Best Buy. Learn more at bestbuy.com. Best Buy. Imagine that.
The Stone Zone on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. By tradition, Republican presidents have not taken positions in party primaries. Neither President Richard Nixon, President Ronald Reagan, or either George H.W. Bush or his son George W. Bush ever took a position pre-primary in any federal contest. Donald Trump has been very different in that regard. Ronald Reagan was extraordinarily popular. I do remember one incident in New Jersey in which two Republican members through redistricting were thrown into the same district. Reagan did endorse the winner, Jim Cotter, but I can't think of any other instance. But Donald Trump has been quite different, and his endorsement packs an incredible political wallop. We saw it in Oklahoma only days ago, where a candidate, Mike Mazzei, who started at 2% of the polls, soared ahead of the state attorney general to make the runoff in that state, which will be held in August. And in Tuesday's Republican primaries, Trump delivered two major victories for MAGA candidates, another sign the Republican Party is now the party that regularly puts conservative fighters into positions of authority. In South Carolina, Attorney General Alan Wilson, very good friend of mine, won the Republican nomination for governor, defeating Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evette in a runoff by a wide margin. Wilson built a broad conservative coalition, winning support from lawmakers across the party, including hardline conservatives and more traditional establishment Republicans. President Trump also endorsed Wilson in the final stretch, as did Senator Tim Scott, following with his support. Wilson now heads into the general election as the heavy favorite in what has become a reliably Republican state, South Carolina. His message focused on safer communities, affordability, and accountable government. As Attorney General, Wilson was influential in efforts to overturn the stolen results of the 2020 presidential election. Wilson's not afraid to put his neck out there and do what's right, and he is precisely the type of leader that South Carolina needs. But in New York's 21st congressional district, pro-Trump businessman Anthony Constantino, you remember him. He's the guy who put the Vote for Trump sign on top of his factory in Amsterdam, New York. Local Democrats flipped out, tried to put him in jail, wanted to fine him $1,000 per day, won the Republican primary to replace Elise Stefanik by almost 20 points. Constantino, the chief executive officer of Sticker Mule, an online printing company, defeated establishment-backed Assemblyman Robert Smullen, who had the endorsement of the New York Republican Party, as well as most of the incumbent Republican members of the House from New York, with the notable exception of Elise Stefanik, who endorsed Constantino upon his victory. Trump endorsed Constantino with a video in the closing hours of that campaign because Constantino became known in the district because of the efforts to put the sign on his factory and his refusal to back down. Constantino now goes into that contest as a prohibitive favorite, but there is an open political question. Assemblyman Smullen continues on the Conservative Party line, but Constantino petitioned on a fourth party, the Taxpayers' Party. Constantino, by my reckoning, spent about $6 million of his own money based on one simple principle. As a self-funding candidate, he would not have to kowtow to any special interest. In other words, the only constituency he would answer to are not the lobbyists, not big defense, not big pharma, not big agriculture, but the people of his district. And therefore he had one of the greatest campaign slogans of all time, Anthony Constantino, nobody's man but yours. We'll see what New York State Conservative Party leaders do. A three-way race could tip this seat to the Democrats, which would be a tragedy. I'm Roger Stone. When we come back, Senator Bernie Moreno, who was sent to Colombia as an observer for their stunning election, joins me to talk about how that country has elected a pro-American, anti-narco-tourist, pro-law and order president. El Tigre.
The Stone Zone on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. The Justice Department is vowing to continue its crackdown on Antifa terrorism after 8 members of a North Texas Antifa cell were sentenced to from 30 to 100 years in federal prison for the July 2025 attack on an ICE facility in Prairie Land, Texas. This marks the first federal case in history in which Antifa members were convicted of terrorism offenses. Prosecutors say the group arrived at the facility on July 4th, dressed in black block gear with faces covered, and began launching explosives and vandalizing government property. They carried 11 firearms, body armor, military-grade medical kits, and Faraday bags to block cell phone tracking. The ringleader, Benjamin Hanil Song, was sentenced to 100 years. Prosecutors say he recruited and trained members, supplied firearms, and shot an Alvarado police officer in the neck when law enforcement responded. We are waiting for, hopefully, Senator Bernie Moreno. He is giving a speech the floor of the U.S. Senate. Hopefully will join us momentarily. We asked him to join us because he was sent to Colombia as a neutral observer for the elections there. Can't think of a better place. Bernie Moreno elected to the U.S. Senate in the 2024 election. Proud to say that I was one of his earliest supporters in both of his U.S. Senate campaigns. We're hoping that he can wrap up his speech and join us. But it is a stunning rebuke to the radical left. Colombian voters handed conservative outsider Abelardo de Espriella, colloquially known as El Tigre, a hard-fought victory in Sunday's presidential runoff. President Trump, who offered his full-throated endorsement to El Tigre, immediately declared de Espriella, who he said won easily, a much better relationship between Washington and Bogota moving forward. The leftist candidate, Cepeda, has refused to concede, and current President Gustavo Petro has been whining about non-existent fraud. But the mandate is clear. Colombia seems to be shutting the door on failed leftist experience. I believe that Senator Moreno has joined us now. Bernie Moreno, welcome to the Stone Zone.
Well, thank you, Roger, and thank you for everything that you do for this country.
That's very kind. So you were sent to Colombia to be a neutral observer of the election there, a very, I think, apt appointment because you yourself were born in Bogota, moved to the United States with your family at age 5, became an American citizen at age 18. You are emblematic of the American success story, having built a major business career before devoting yourself to public service. Proud to say that I was a strong supporter in both of your Senate campaigns, and you have not let me down, not in the slightest. So I'm proud to be among your many supporters, but it does kind of, while I'm pleased about this movement across Central and South America, you see it in Chile, you see it in Peru, you see it in Honduras, you see it across the board, now you see it in Colombia. But the current president, Gustavo Petro, has been whining about not what I think is non-existent fraud, but you were there, you were on the ground, you were the first person, by the way, who teed me into what was happening there. What did you see on the ground, Senator?
They run elections so well that it is embarrassing to the United States that we don't even come close to that. So let me lay it out for you, Roger. And this is, I think, what animates the president so much, because the country of Colombia has a GDP of about the size of Los Angeles. It's a country of 50 million. Nowhere in comparison to the scale, sophistication of the United States of America. Yet for their elections, it's one day, 8 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You have to have proof of citizenship on your possession in order to walk into the place where you even vote. You have to show that ID to get the ballot. You get fingerprinted, and you have to sign when you receive that ballot. It's all paper ballots, zero mail-in balloting. Roger, let me say it again. Nobody is allowed to mail in a ballot. You must be present and biometrically checked in order to vote. They have higher voter participation in the United States of America. And Roger, the election polls closed at 4 p.m. local time. By 5 p.m., 1 hour later, they had manually counted and reported the results of 26 million votes, a record voter turnout. Then 2 days later, this morning, 3 days later, this morning, they audited the entirety of every single ballot by hand with judges, and it was an error rate of 0.0003.
Absolutely proves, of course, that it can be done. In France, they count 38 million ballots in one day without any problem whatsoever, paper ballots. So the president's call for election reform, elections on one day, paper ballots, no electronic voting machines that are connected to the internet, no mail-in ballots. That really is the answer. I know that you strongly support the Save America Act, but I wonder about some of your fellow Republicans in the Senate. This doesn't seem to be a matter of controversy. All it says is a person should be a United States citizen to vote in a federal election, and they should have a photo ID. Why do some Republicans, a handful, but some, find this controversial?
Well, we're virtually all united on supporting the Save America Act on the Republican side. 50 out of 53 senators. But the problem isn't the three Republicans. The problem is the 47 out of 47 Democrats that have consistently voted against it. I think we should put them on the record again and strip it out and say, okay, how about just voter ID, and then how about just proof of citizenship? Because, again, these are 95-5 issues, Roger. I mean, this is common sense. To go into the Barack Hussein Obama library, you have to show voter ID. To volunteer to help snowplow illegal immigrant neighborhoods in New York, you had to show 2 forms of voter ID. I mean, this is just common sense. It's completely ridiculous, the arguments that Democrats make. They say disenfranchises poor people. Well, guess what? 99% of Colombians have a national proof of citizenship ID that they carry with them at all times. 99% of the country. And the country has dramatically higher levels of diversity, dramatically higher levels of poverty. So it can be done. It's all a lie. It's a lie so that they can cheat. Look at California. So I'm hoping, Roger, that through Senator Ron Johnson's committee, the Permanent Subcommittee of Investigations, will bring the people from Colombia that ran the elections and subpoena Gavin Newsom and have him sit there and make these arguments. I got to tell you a very funny story. When I was with the registrar on Sunday, and he's walking me through the elections and what they were doing to safeguard, et cetera, I said to him, why don't you let people vote by mail? And he turned to his assistant. We're speaking in Spanish. He turned to his assistant and said, I think the senator isn't giving me the right question. His Spanish must be bad. And the assistant goes, what do you mean? He goes, because I don't understand his question. So he repeated it, obviously correctly, and said, why don't you let people vote by mail? He looked at me and goes, that is absurd. If people voted by mail, you'd open the door to fraud and people wouldn't have confidence in our elections. Like he thought it was the most ridiculous question anybody could possibly ask him.
Yeah, it's kind of like the sky is blue and grass is green. Although I remember when former Attorney General Bill Barr, in an interview with Wolf Blitzer on CNN, admitted, using his words, mail-in voting is an open invitation for voter fraud. Strangely, he did not keep that position consistently. Senator, how do you feel about the president's call to end the filibuster rule that requires 60 votes to get anything to the floor of the U.S. Senate for a vote?
Well, look, if we had JFK 1960s Democrats, I don't think we would need that. I think we could get a lot of things done in the Senate if you had normal Democrats that fought for working Americans. And nobody knows that better than you do, Roger. You know exactly what I'm talking about. There was a time and place in this country where Democrats were normal, American-loving people. The crop of Democrats that we have today, and it's sad to say this, it's really, this comment isn't about being partisan. It breaks my heart to say it. They hate this country. Look at the people who New York elected yesterday. The one lady who said she uses the American flag as toilet paper. I'm somebody who I think the greatest honor in my life, the greatest gift God gave me, is parents that brought me to the United States. And for me to be able to swear an oath of allegiance to the United States of America, one of the greatest days of my life. And yet these people are disparaging the meaning of what it means to be American. So I think given that circumstance, the filibuster just doesn't work. It's something that does not meet the times. Unfortunately, we need 50 votes out of 53 to get rid of the filibuster, and we probably honestly have somewhere around 40. So we're not even close. And there's not any kind of leverage that can be enacted on the people who just won't do it. And so I'm committed to making certain that we keep at this, keep the fight. We have to raise the consciousness among Americans. Ultimately, the Democrats who are obstructing 80-20 issues have to be held accountable in November. That means our voters show up and make a statement. We win and beat these Democrats soundly and hope that at some point they come back to being normal.
No, what you say is absolutely true. I mean, when I was growing up, the Democrat Party believed in free enterprise, believed in capitalism, believed in a strong national defense, believed in patriotism, believed in God. Yeah, they wanted to spend a bit more for taxes. They wanted to spend a bit more for public spending, but they fundamentally were patriotic Americans who loved their country. That Democrat Party, the party of JFK, the party of Harry Truman, by the way, the founder of the State of Israel, that party just literally no longer exists. The term moderate Democrat is an oxymoron. As I said earlier in the show, believe me, Chuck Schumer sees the handwriting on the wall. When your colleague in the House, Dan Goldman, one of the most liberal members of Congress, gets defeated by a socialist because he's too conservative, that tells you a great deal about where that party is headed.
I mean, yeah, Robert, you've been at this your whole life, politics, and you think about Graham Plattner in Maine, Abdullah Sayed in Michigan, James Tallarico in Texas. These would be fantasy candidates from you 10 years ago. Because you'd say, my God, we'll get 98% of the vote. It'll be 98-2. I mean, if a guy like Tallarico was running in Texas 10 years ago, you'd laugh. You'd be like, my God, this guy could never even conceive of getting any votes in a place like Texas. Or Abdullah Sayed in Michigan. I mean, this is people who are now these are the standard bearers for the Democrat Party. These are the leaders, the philosophical foundation of this modern socialist party that has taken over what used to be the Democrat Party. I don't even like calling them Democratic Socialists. They're just socialists who, by the way, happen to hate America.
Yeah, I'll be very interested to see whether Texas elects a U.S. senator who is a vegan and wants to use our taxpayers for transgenderism. That will be very, very interesting. Unthinkable in the old days of the Bourbon Democrats.
Who says he hates Christianity? Let's not forget that part.
Oh, no, I left that out. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with Senator Bernie Moreno, a man who could make a huge amount of money, but instead of doing so has decided to devote his life to public service. I'm very proud of the record that he's racking up in the U.S. Senate. Proud to say that I was one of his earliest supporters. And Senator Moreno, you have made me proud every day you have served, and we're honored to have you here today. I want to talk about this, whether there's some commonality over the fact that we cut off USAID funding, and now suddenly conservative, populist-based parties are starting to win elections in South and Central America. I find that to be more than a coincidence. You're listening to the Stone Zone. We're here with Senator Bernie Moreno of Ohio, and we'll be right back.
Adobe Firefly is the all-in-one creative studio with AI-powered image and video editing for today's creative process. Built for creators of every kind, Firefly helps you generate, edit, and experiment fast. Because the asks aren't getting smaller, the budgets aren't getting bigger, and the timelines, oh yeah, still tight. With all the best creative AI models in one place, Firefly brings your ideas to life. Unlock a better way to make with Adobe Firefly.
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Halliday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Halliday. Halliday, bring it on.
The Stone Zone on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're back. We're honored to have Senator Bernie Moreno of Ohio, who recently served as an observer for the elections in Colombia. I do want to focus a little bit more on the domestic scene. It was reported that President Donald Trump met with the Senate Republican caucus today, and some reports from that meeting describe it as tense, maybe even combative. Senator, I don't want to put you on the spot here because I know there are things you can and cannot say, but what can you tell us about that meeting?
I came from a family of 7 siblings and a strong mom and a strong dad. It was a family conversation, and sometimes family conversations get tense, but at the end of the day, honestly, it was actually really long past due. I think it was important to get some of these issues on the table, and I commend for President Trump. But look, the guy's tough as nails, and this is a guy that does not back down. If he believes something in his heart to be the right thing to do, there's nobody on earth that's going to talk him out of it. And that's what's allowed them to be so effective. And I think that message really, I hope my colleagues got, and certainly I got loud and clear, was be tough, fight. These are things that matter. These are the things that our voters expect us to do. Do those things. Do not back down. You've known the man infinitely longer than I have. This is not new to him. It's not an act to him. He's not play acting something. This is what he believes in his heart and soul. Nobody's ever going to tell him not to be who he is. And that's where he was today at lunch. And I thought it was fantastic. I think it was great. We ended up stronger and more unified as a result. And the ones who are a mess is the Democrats. Look, every single Democrat Senate candidate is running on the premise that they will not vote for Chuck Schumer to be minority leader or majority leader. Whereas in our case, we're fully behind President Trump. We all believe his agenda. People like me would have never gotten elected had it not been for President Trump. He carried me across the finish line in Ohio. Let's say I didn't run a good campaign. I had support from, of course, you were there with me from day one. But ultimately, the reason I'm here in Washington, D.C. and able to make a difference in the things that I care about because of Donald J. Trump.
Yeah, what you say about his toughness is absolutely true. Look, I worked for Richard Nixon from the time I was very young. He was a very, very tough guy. Made, up until Donald Trump, the greatest comeback in American political history. You don't do that if you're made out of sugar candy. He was a tough guy. We also worked for Senator Bob Dole, a man who was hit by a shell in Italy in World War II, was told that he would never walk again, never have the use of his hands or his limbs again, would never feed himself again, would never button his own shirt. And only through sheer will did he nurse himself back into health to become not only the senator from Kansas, the Senate majority leader, but also a leading candidate for president, would have been a great president. But neither one of them is as tough or determined as Donald Trump. He is the toughest man I've ever met, and he is very determined. He also now is in a unique position of not ever having to run for re-election. So I think a lot of the political considerations that go into decision-making go out to the window, where he is able to say what is best for the country. I am praying that his peace agreement, that the ceasefire holds together, because I think that is the best thing for America. I also laud Vice President J.D. Vance, who I think has an extraordinarily difficult time trying to help hold the ceasefire together. I'm glad to see that the president sent him to Switzerland to conduct these negotiations. But you're absolutely right. Trump is consistently underestimated. His enemies, his detractors, they underestimate him today. Loves the country, just the way he's beautified Washington, D.C., cleaned up the monuments, cleaned up the reflecting pool. He's a man who deeply loves his country. I once asked him about his legacy. He doesn't care about his legacy. He cares about his country. And he's right. I think he's been very clever to connect the renewal of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which I personally were in the Senate. I wouldn't vote to renew, but that's me, to the Save America Act. This has been a brilliant, brilliant maneuver. It has to be, it has to be exciting just to be in the room with him. I've traveled with him. I've known him for 50 years. He is incredibly unique. And I think it's an honor for both of us to serve in his movement, to serve in the America First movement. And I commend you for the job you did in Colombia, ensuring that they had a fair, honest election. I want to thank my guest, Senator Bernie Moreno. He's a real comer in the U.S. Senate, for joining us today. Until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?